and we're going to be bringing to the stage with me. So first, I'm going to be inviting Carolin Wend. She's a chief of staff at Mintbase, and then Aleksandra Smilek, who's co-founder of Kastl.cloud, a founder of Kastl.cloud, and developing the DeSci track lead at the Foresight Institute. And then the third, there's going to be Robert Schmitt, a co-founder and COO at Toucan Protocol. Thank you for joining me. All right. So first thing that we kind of want to address and mention is that crypto overall is still seeing a lot of negative connotations or negative reactions, especially when we are talking to the regulators. Quite often the interpretation or the response towards crypto and blockchain overall would be that, oh, this is used for money laundering, this is for the terrorism and whatnot. And here we have guests that can possibly convince us and the regulators into the opposite. So I'm going to start with you, Carolin. I know we quite often just scratch the surface, but crypto is no longer just about the cryptocurrencies, the altcoins, and the shitcoins. That is so passé. It's no longer even about the ICOs alone. We now have NFTs, so I'm inviting you to share with us a bit more about the use cases that we can see in this space.
Yeah, sure. So NFTs, most of us know NFTs as those 1 million rocks that are sold on OpenSea, but it's more than just art. So we at Mintbase, we are an NFT protocol on NEAR, and we are super hyper-focused on allowing other people to build their own NFT marketplaces. So NFTs can be really anything that we consume online nowadays. It can be a ticket, it can be a song, it can be a burrito in your favorite restaurant. It can really be anything, and in the future it will really be anything. But what is even more exciting about NFTs is that just imagine a future where I walk into a VR. So in the future we will not be shopping on Amazon or whatever because it's boring. It's just like one site and it's always the same. But just imagine I'm just walking around with my VR goggles and I see, I don't know, my favorite cereal or perfume that I want to buy, and I buy this NFT, which at the same time triggers the delivery process from that online shop to my home. So it's kind of connecting this digital world that we have out there, and it will change the way we communicate, the way we do business. Like everything is transparent with NFTs. I don't know where to start. It's just really a broad subject, but for now, we really need to figure out the infrastructure, that what we are doing, and the next step will be to really showcase why it's important. And I don't like to talk in this crypto speech because it's really hard for people to understand, but basically where we see the future heading is, Skyscanner or Momondo, where you look for flights and you have all those different options. So in the future, basically, you have one ticket, one flight ticket, and you will search on Momondo or Skyscanner or whatever, but they will be popping up different places that sell one flight ticket, and we just have one ticket, which is one NFT, but we have different marketplaces that are competing against each other, but although there's just one ticket, which is a really difficult concept to wrap your head around, but this is really interoperability, what we're talking about. This will change everything. Because right now, our internet is gated by big players like Amazon, Google, and whatever. In the future, it's about niche marketplaces that will have access to sell this ticket, flight ticket, whatever. They will be competing against each other, and that's what we are super excited about.
Very cool. Thank you so much for sharing. Next, I'm going to be turning to you, Robert. We hear a lot about the ReFi movement lately, and it really is changing the game. Even how I joined Doing Good, for example, it was really because it was starting to do good with the blockchain itself, as in, there's plenty of donations, there's plenty of things that we could do to bring in the social welfare, or even perhaps do something for the nature. So please take us through the Toucan and what is it that you actually do? How do you change the game?
Yeah, so at Toucan, our mission is to accelerate the funding towards climate action and climate projects, and we do this by tokenizing carbon credits. So carbon credits are an instrument to fund projects that do things like removing carbon by planting forests or conserving forests or various other methodologies to remove carbon or avoid emissions. And so what we do is we take these carbon credits that exist in currently sort of legacy registries, and we make them into tokens through like a tokenization process. And then what we've done is we've kind of packaged those tokens into highly liquid sort of carbon tokens that then people can build with. So what we've seen is the emergence of quite a large ecosystem built around these carbon tokens. So we have around a bit over 100 projects building with these carbon tokens, and they're building lots of different new applications. I think also kind of pointing back to what you mentioned with the flight scanner, we have then one carbon token that's on chain, and then you have now multiple different marketplaces. We have things like Atom, Senken, Klima, Return, like multiple of these marketplaces that can tap into the same underlying carbon credit and the same liquidity for those carbon credits, and that just creates a lot more efficiency for the market. And the reason this efficiency matters is because today, middlemen and brokers capture around 40 to 60% of all the value of carbon credits. Instead of it going to the projects and actually funding climate action, it goes to financial intermediaries. And we think by disintermediating this market and automating a lot of these things, we can have a much more efficient market, and more of the funding will flow directly to the projects. So that's one of it, and then also we expand accessibility of it significantly. So now a lot more people can access these credits, and they can be used in a lot of novel ways. So I think that's like one example of what can be done using this new technology to really advance this type of market.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned the fundraising for the projects and distribution of the funds, and this is something that we've previously addressed with Alex as well. Lead us through that, the DeSci movement and the DeSci projects. How do you look into the fundraising? What do you envision? Do you want to fundraise through the NFTs? Is that also something that could be a use case for the NFTs? What's your feeling about it?
So, yeah, I think, tied to what you've been saying, actually, and NFTs are not a joke. They are making an impact as any tool, actually, new tool. Like we started with hammers and Smilek, and we end up here. And I think any tools should be considered as a major way of shifting paradigms. So when it comes to look at NFTs and Web3 tooling and science and the way science can be funded, actually you can find a major impact by combining NFT and science. So what we do at Foresight Institute is actually to work with a very old institute, 37 years old, based in San Francisco, that has a very big pool of talented scientists and engineers. We are dedicated to biotech, nanotech research, but also longevity research. So those are fields that can have major impact, right? But most of the time, actually, those science tend to have some difficulties to find funds, actually, because they might be too early stage. If you take longevity, right? 10 years ago, no one was talking of taking seriously longevity as something that can really bring us new cures. Today, the guys who were 10 years ago looking at longevity can now replace our cells, can now cure very major disease. And so if you look at the way science is looking for funding, you can actually see the bottleneck that we have today with our funding mechanism. So to speak, the guys who are early stage are undergoing what we call the valley of death, where you have an idea as a scientist, and before ending your third or fourth trial and going onto the market with your IP, you have this huge valley of death, right? Where most of the time you spend more time actually looking for fundings than looking for your research and doing your research. So bringing NFT in that kind of paradigm can massively change the paradigms, because you can actually, thanks to different protocols, find fundings for your scientists. So imagine a DAO, and those DAO exist already, but I can be like very general here because I think the case is the most important right here. You can have a DAO, and this DAO can release an IP NFT, a scientific IP, where everyone, part of the DAO, is somehow funding the science, right, of the scientists. So it can, like, thanks to the NFTs, actually be completely transparent and have like a massive boost into our way of actually unfolding the science. And actually it can also help us to have more power into which science should be pushed forward. Because today, you're only like one of the only way you have to invest into science is to invest into like the big companies, scientific companies, pharma companies, right? This is your way to invest into science. If you think about NFTs and DAOs, DeSci DAOs, you could, and you can today actually, fund early stage science way more before a big pharma company is actually operating. So what you do actually is to work towards the future and have a self-sovereignty thanks to this like Web3 and DeSci NFT tooling. So whether it is an IP NFT or maybe some funding mechanism like some donation through an IP to a scientist, you can have a massive impact into even the future actually. So, and I think it's tied to what you do also with all the sustainability and ecological questions as well.
Definitely, yeah. I mean,
a sub-question to that would be, because every time we come to funding or every time we come to big chunks of money being collected and then distributed further, quite often we bump into the regulatory issues, the AML, the prevention of money laundering and stuff. With that, there's also the KYC. So I'm wondering whether you can share a bit more about whether you see that requirement to be reasonable, whether you see the implementation of the KYC, for example, with these types of projects as a good way to go about, or do you have some feedback, a different negative feedback towards that? Maybe we can start with you, Robert.
Yeah, sure. So we recently kind of outlined a position, our sort of position on KYC, and just to kind of summarize it, I mean, I think we want to enable innovation in the space, and I don't think we want to like stifle the innovation. And I think there is a bit of a risk that KYC, if it's done improperly, can cause barriers that make so that smart contracts and things like this just don't work. But there are ways to balance this and kind of have a reasonable compromise. And so we're going to implement KYC specifically on a few like types of actions that are kind of like important in the ecosystem, but don't prevent a lot of innovation. So this is specifically when you tokenize carbon credits, when you go from like a traditional registry and move it on chain, and then the reverse, when you take a carbon credit and you want to move it back off chain. And we see that as sort of a reasonable compromise. And we think already those actors that are doing that, they already have some level of KYC in the sort of legacy registries that they're using. And there's a lot of sort of comparables in terms of how these carbon credits are used currently in the traditional market. It's not being KYC'd everywhere, it's just KYC'd in certain portions. And we think we can kind of emulate that a little bit on chain. So that's, and we're looking at kind of what technologies we can implement to, as was mentioned, I think at an earlier panel, also do this with sort of privacy in mind. And we can definitely do this in such a way that we preserve privacy but still enable compliance and sort of safety.
Privacy by design. Anybody else wants to share something about that?
Yeah, I mean, we are always researching and trying to stay up to date with the newest regulations, especially also in the US. We are a US company. So it's definitely a difficult topic because most wallets and most customers right now are anonymous, and we don't really want to know, like, everyone who buys something for 0.1 cent to know his identity. But we are looking, like, especially at Mintbase to implement some features where we can have like credit like scores of certain like DAOs or stores. For example, if I have I don't know, a store on Mintbase and I've have another identity on another marketplace and I'm a known player in the field, you could have kind of like a higher score, like a verified button. So this is more our immediate, know your customer research. But yeah, it will definitely be interesting to see what we can do in the near future and how we can kind of stay in the legal requirement. Yeah.
Mm. And Alex, do you think that anonymity here for the funding of the scientific research is also quite an important aspect, or?
Look what I see. Yeah. I think it's important actually to take into account how we can actually derive it to dystopia with this. It's really important when it comes to talk about the DeSci and the future of humanity. Actually, I'm using big words, but this is the case actually, and try to find this right balance actually that we should keep. So yeah, I think it's super.
For sure. You mentioned previously that you are a US company, and quite often previously the information that was coming around the NFTs was US-centric, especially around the fractionalized NFTs and how, for example, all of a sudden it might actually happen that the NFT is a security as well. It's interesting because just recently we got this MiCA finalized text, right? And it has to be mentioned, the NFTs are by default excluded from the regulation on the European level. And yet there is some sort of a reservation in particular recitals, saying that, for example, if there's a big collection or if, for example, the NFTs are going to be fractionalized, it might still be some sort of a crypto asset. So all of a sudden, we are dealing with 3 types of NFTs, if you want to call it that way. One would be that it's excluded by default. The second one would be that it's a crypto asset. And then the third one would be that it still falls under the topic of financial instruments. So it's really interesting and an important discussion to be held, especially taking into account that the European Parliament is still working on a paper that is going to dive deeper into that topic and possibly provide us with a bit more guidelines and a bit more, a better distinction about what is a crypto asset or what is actually a financial instrument and what is an NFT. So I kind of want to gather your thoughts around really what is the definition of an NFT? Like, sure, it stands for a non-fungible token, but do you have any thoughts on that as well?
Like the definition of an NFT?
Yes.
It's a piece of code. It's a standard that can be different on different chains. On NEAR we use NEP 171. On Ethereum, the most common is ERC 721, but it's basically just a code that bundles information. I think Nate could explain it better, but I'm not a coder. But it's a standard on the internet. NFT lives on a smart contract, which is like a condition. And NFT, like on a more practical level, it can contain, for example, we use like the metadata. Like an NFT can have metadata that is pegged to it. We use Arweave, where, for example, NFT has a picture or a song. And this is actually stored on another blockchain, which is decentralized or distributed. But and like the normal person should only know that it's like a digital asset, can be a ticket as well, can be also can be a physical object. It's in the future we won't be talking about this anymore because it will just be the standard. Yeah.
Cool. Thank you so much.
I would kind of just add to that. I think it's like interesting to think of like what the non-fungibility sort of means and kind of comparing that to sort of in real world assets, like what's like non-fungible and like for example, I mean not being fungible just means that it's like has some sort of unique attribute and it's just not the same as all the other ones. And I mean if you take like physical cash, it's actually like technically kind of like a NFT, like because it has a serial number,
exactly.
And some bills have like specific serial numbers that make that bill worth more than others, and so like that's an NFT, like technically sort of like an NFT. And there's a lot of things that are non-fungible, and there's a lot of variance in that. Like humans are not fungible, like a house is not fungible, a car, like so like our university degree, like all these things are non-fungible. And so I think when we talk about it in terms of tokens and representing those types of items for tokens, I just think it's like there's so much nuance to it. And I think it's like oftentimes the conversation becomes about like NFTs. It's like profile pictures and stuff like that. But like there's just so many applications to it. Like we're specifically, when we tokenize carbon credits, like we have what's called a batch NFT, which is like representing like a batch of carbon credits on chain. And like it's not that we're like an NFT project, it's just that like we need to use this token standard because it's a token standard that makes sense because we need it to be like non-fungible. And that doesn't mean we should be like falling under the regulation of like, something that's like purpose, has a different purpose. So I think it's like there's a lot of nuance to it. And I think it's like quite important to consider the very, many different use cases of tokens that are non-fungible.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think it's important also to understand an NFT through the cases, actually, the why, where, who. It's very important, actually. I don't know if we can have a definition of this, like, without actually the usage of it.
So we are at a regulatory conference, so I will be leading towards a bit more regulatory questions. But like one of the things that we can see in MiCA is that there is mentioning of the fractionalization as being a very strong indicator that might lead towards it being a regulated crypto asset. So I kind of wanted to gather your thoughts around the fractionalization as well. Do you see that happening very often? When you see it happening, do you see it happening for the purpose of just having a shared ownership? Or is there really quite often a purpose of also sharing the profits and having that expectation on the other side that's going to be splitting the revenues as well?
With the IP NFT, it could be like very useful actually to have a fractionalized IP NFT. Why? Because like buying an IP in science can be very expensive, right?
Mm-hmm.
And if we follow the idea of having a DAO, being like more open, welcoming a lot of people actually, and having a governance, an IP that is fractionalized could actually enable a lot of people to participate into the science and the science funding, right? So, yeah, if I have to choose, I think, between like one IP that is not fractionalized, I talk about like the scientific IP that costs $500,000 and that is like by a big pharma company, and a fractionalized IP detained by many different actors, I think I would go with the fractionalized one. And it's, I think, less shady than being like detained by just one actor, actually.
I think Nate just raised his hand, but fractionalized NFTs, like by definition, I mean, it's really difficult because I don't think there's any case, like, Nate, you come on. You wanted to say something?
What's the difference between a fungible token and a fractionalized NFT? Are they the same?
That's a good question.
One token, many owners, divisible, then we're kind of going NFT, and then we're going back into...
So how I see, I mean, fractionalized NFTs, how everyone talks about it, in my opinion, like what we do is we have like an NFT, like we can only have one owner, but when it's sold, we can have different people who can receive the money from the NFT. But it's not how all the other people are defining this. But yeah, it just doesn't really exist.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, like our NFTs, we do fractionalize them. So there's a fractionalization process, and that's like all carbon credits that go on chain become initially an NFT, and then they become fractionalized into a fungible token that has a linkage back to that like NFT, and like that's just the data model that made sense for us in this case. And I mean the carbon credit, like when it is fractionalized, each token represents 1 ton of carbon, and NFT can represent a batch, like say 50,000 tons. So then that becomes 50,000 tokens. So it's just like a way to make it fungible, because then when it's fungible, it becomes way more flexible to use it. So then we can kind of, you can use smaller increments, like what was mentioned. So like, most products, if you just have these like big clunky things, like it creates a lot of friction because then you can only work in big volumes. And oftentimes, it might be the same thing as the big clunky thing. Like it's like fundamentally the same thing, but you just need it to be smaller because therefore it's fluid. And I mean, that's in our case, we just wanted to one token to represent 1 ton because it's like easier to like work with and so forth. So that's like one use case of it. And I wouldn't say that fundamentally changes in our case, then, the carbon tons that are in the batch versus, if it's fractionalized, like it's not a big difference. Like if we could instead we could do this with NFTs. We could just, instead of doing one batch of 50,000 tons, we could do 50,000 batches that are 50,000 NFTs that are 1 ton each. It would be like we could just do that. Then we're just wasting a bunch of space in this database, and that wouldn't make sense.
Yeah, I do. There is like a lot of actually usage for the fractional NFTs.
All right. So I mean,
Yeah.
I gather from all the feedbacks that possibly it should not be a strong indicator. But this then, of course, means that it's a regulated crypto asset. It is an indicator, perhaps, but it should be taken case by case, studied, and then taken into consideration whether the regulation applies or not. Thank you so much for that. Another question that I have, and feel free to decline an answer or not, but how do you see the regulation helping this space? Are they needed in the NFT space? For what reasons? Do you have any challenges? Do you believe that self-regulation and the rules that we impose through the platforms are good enough? And should they come first and foremost from the community itself, or is it okay for the regulators to actually look into that? Or are you more or less like afraid that this is not going to be beneficial for anybody?
So I feel like the technology is so early and we haven't even touched, like right now everyone knows NFTs, like from art, being sold. But we haven't even tapped into all the other use cases, right? Like, I don't know, just like tickets or whatever, like simple things we consume on the internet right now, right? Is that also, if that is declared like an NFT, or sold as an NFT, does it like do Eventbrite? And I mean, a ticket is like so difficult like to grab as well. It's just blurry. Like the technology is super early and the use cases are not really developed yet. So regulating before we really know what we can do with the technology is really difficult. So I feel there needs to be a little bit of a
Pushback?
Yeah, I think we should first figure out what we can do and how we can make this technology really useful, and then we can talk about regulation, I feel. Yeah.
I think it can slow down also the development if there are no regulation, actually, for investors, for like, I see another case, which is the already existing non-crypto native companies. I often see those companies willing to know more about Web3, to dive into Web3, and at some point when we come into like the legal resolution and discussions, everything is slowing down, which is normal. But the reason why everything is slowing down is that we don't have any regulation, or like we have a lack of like regulation sometimes. And it can actually slow down the path of like development of even like big and nice companies who are not willing actually to take the risk because they are too big to take such a risk. So actually I think having regulation and more regulation can boost the economy of the EU. I mean, like, I've been, just to take an example, but I've been talking to some media company, Web2 and TV companies, and they're really, really scared to take any decisions about like Web3 because they don't know where they're going.
I'd say like, I think of regulation in the same way that when we talk about NFTs, there's like so many different types of NFTs.
Yeah.
And like with regulation, there's like so many different types of regulation. And regulation can be very positive because you're really just, establishing like a set of rules. And I don't think, I think like most people are like fine with there being like a set of rules around certain things you can and can't do. But I mean, I think the problem is when you set rules that really don't make sense for this technology because the people who might like it was just set in a context where it didn't make sense. I think that's where it can really stifle innovation and cause a lot of damage. And also, I mean, we're a crypto company and we spend so much money on compliance. It's ridiculous. We have so many legal teams, and so it's not that we're not trying to be compliant. Yeah. It's just that regulation is just so complex. There's so many different regulations. We don't know which ones to abide by, and it's kind of a gray zone. And I think if you would have just clear regulation that's simple, I think we would really love that. It would save us so many costs, and I think also we're working with highly sort of institutionalized product, and I think there's a lot of benefits in terms of institutional adoption if you have some clear regulation, because it also makes it easier for people to for corporates to adopt these types of products. So I think it can be a very positive thing, but it has to be done right, and if it's not done right, then it wouldn't be positive.
Yeah, and agile, yeah, for sure, because the technology is nascent. I agree. So
I mean, the use cases are so different that we probably need to think about which regulation applies to which. So I know that our time is basically up. I'm going to quickly ask you just for a final remark for our audience, if there's anything that you want them to take with them as a memory, or anything that you want to share with them.
IP, NFT in Europe?
I think the on-chain economy can be the most kind of green economy in the world, and can be inherently very sustainable. And I think we should see it's something that's going to be very positive and create a lot of abundance. And so I think we should see how we can support it. And yeah, that would be my message.
Thank you.
Yeah, I agree.
Okay. Well, I hope you were convinced by our panelists. I thank you again. And I wish to get a very big round of applause for our panelists.
Thank you.
Thank you.